Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NOCO webinar, Traffic Management Systems, Actively Managing the Display of Queue Warning Messages. My name is Matt Jasnos, and I'll facilitate today's webinar. Before we get started, though, as a quick reminder, at the National Operations Center of Excellence, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. You can go to the NOCO's website, which is transportationops.org, to browse through links for TSMO resources and news.
Fort Myers, okay.
Previous
Fort
webinar
Myers.
recordings and case
Good
studies
recommendation.
can be accessed from there. Now I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on NOCO's website. All attendees today are encouraged to stay engaged by using the Q&A features for questions and chat features for comments. These are both on the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on your screen's orientation with Zoom. If you have any questions, we encourage you to enter them in the Q&A area as they come to mind at any time. Also, please feel free to enter your name and agency in the chat to say hello to your peers. Now, I'm going to hand it off to our moderator today, who's representing the Missouri Department of Transportation, Alex Wassman. Alex?
Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. Today, we will be covering traffic management systems, how they actively manage the display of queue warning messages. Let's go ahead to the next slide. This is opening poll. Everyone, please answer the questions that should pop up on your screen. This will cover what organization you're affiliated with and what your current role is with traffic management systems. All right, little technical issues, but we're hanging in there with you. The agenda for the webinar today is on the screen. We're going to start out with me giving a little overview of the TMC Pool Fund study. We'll move on to our first presenter, going over challenges with actively managing the display of queue warning messages, and then on to a couple DOTs, or 3 DOTs giving their agencies current practices and some lessons learned. Finally, we'll have the Q&A, and I'll give a little bit more information about how to stay connected. Please remember, as we go along and you have questions pop into your head, just go ahead and open up that Q&A box and enter any questions you have. It will put them into a queue for me, and we will make sure to get to them at the end. Next slide. As previously stated, I'm Alex Wassman, traffic liaison engineer with Missouri DOT. I was formerly the chair of the TMC Pool Fund study up until I got my new role a few months ago. So I am intimately familiar with the operations, even though I am not currently an active participant in the study. Next slide. For every webinar, we have to make a brief reference to this FHWA disclaimer. Basically, it says that FHWA and the public agencies presenting today are providing their own experience and opinions, and nothing should be construed as an official policy or as an endorsement of any product. Next slide. Learning objectives for today. Today we'll be discussing the current state of practice of displaying queue warning messages. That includes the challenges associated with displaying these types of messages and lessons learned from agencies who are currently utilizing queue warnings. Next slide. The TMC Pool Fund Study is a group of currently 25 different public agencies and organizations who voluntarily pool funds each year to study, hence the name, and address key challenges and issues they are facing in support of improving performance, capabilities, and how they manage and operate their TMSs. The goals are to improve performance, capabilities, and management of our TMCs. Next slide. The value proposition of the TMC Pool Fund study is that it enables agencies to interact with other TMC managers who are experiencing similar technical, personnel, resource, and other issues. It provides a great opportunity to collectively identify these issues, provide insights into projects, and help shape resources that the TMC Pool Fund Study is developing. Next up, we'll go over some current TMC Pool Fund Study projects. On the screen, you can see the current list of 8 projects that are funded and 3 upcoming projects that are waiting to go out to bid. You can find additional information and about these projects, as well as the completed reports for other projects for the Pool Fund Study on the Pool Fund Study website. Next slide. In addition to the TMC Pool Fund Study projects that are directly funded, the TMC PFS also supports some other projects. We've had great success in submitting a few projects to the NCHRP and getting them in the queue and funded, and then participating in the research panels with them. Next slide. In addition to the Pool Fund Study website, the TMS portal hosted by NOCO serves as a one-stop shop for agencies to access and share information on TMS-related issues. I would encourage everyone to start here when you're looking for information and when you would like to share lessons learned or resources with other TMC operators, TMS operators. Next slide. So this webinar today is part of the TMS Emerging Topics webinar series. It's co-sponsored by FHWA and NOCO and led by the TMC Pool Fund Study. We are sponsoring regular webinars every other month on 12 emerging TMS topics, and we will continue through 2026. I would encourage everyone to sign up for any of these that you are interested in on the NOCO site. So on the TMS site, there is the emerging topics page, which lets you go back and look at the fact sheets, previous presentations, information on the webinar that was presented on all previous, and the future ones will be posted here as well. First up today, presenting on challenges with actively managing the display of queue warning messages is Reno Giordano. Reno is Vice President, Transportation Operations at WSP, and he will be providing an overview about why this is an emerging topic among TMSs. Hand it over to you, Reno.
All right, thank you, Matt. Let's move to the next slide and dive right into why actively managing the display of queue warning messages is an important emerging topic. So first, queuing conditions on freeway facilities present significant safety concerns. There's the increased potential for rear-end crashes and the introduction of shock waves that disrupt traffic flow upstream of a queue. The queues themselves can be recurring or non-recurring. Causes of recurring queues can include things like bottleneck or roadway geometry deficiencies, or such as the heavily used off-ramps, particularly when a queue spills back onto the main line, merge areas with heavy on-ramp traffic volumes, lane drops or the reduction in number of lanes on a freeway. And non-recurring queues, of course, can be caused by crashes or work zones on a temporary basis, reduction in roadway capacity and travel speed due to a work zone. So what is one way we can deal with that? In response, traffic management systems can provide warning messages to alert vehicles before they encounter the unexpected or unstable traffic flow conditions from that queue. Drivers are less likely to need to take abrupt action like hard braking, abrupt lane changes, even running off the road to prevent a rear-end crash. But to capitalize on these safety benefits of TMSs displaying queue warning messages, what do we need to know about the role of TMSs and traffic management center operations staff? We'll want to look at things like the actions, decisions, information needs, capabilities, and resources that TMSs and operators may need to support using queue warning messages on freeways. So let's explore that further. And next slide. So the capabilities needed for a TMS to display warning messages associated with areas of unstable traffic flow can include TMS assets to monitor the travel conditions, typically including sensors to measure speeds and/or vehicle flows at multiple points upstream of the potential bottleneck location. For example, as you approach a work zone lane closure. And typical data sources for this are loop detectors or microwave vehicle detection equipment. Another option is probe data, for example, from toll tags or third-party vehicle probes, or even crowdsourced data can supplement or substitute for those fixed roadway or roadside sensor data sources. Another option is connected vehicle data, but that's not, as we found, regularly being used for the display of queue warning messages because of limited CVs on the roadway currently, but we should make a note of that as an option. In addition to the traffic sensors, we need TMS software to detect the presence of the queue and then select an appropriate warning message. Message selection would be based on software's logic or algorithm and may require operator approval and ultimate posting to the third element that's required, changeable message signs or portable changeable message signs to provide the warning message itself to the drivers of approaching vehicles. Yeah, go ahead. We can move to the next slide. So diving a little further into the detail, how the TMS functions to display those queue warning messages using the TMS assets I just described. First, data is collected by the traffic sensors to determine the location of a potentially changing location of the back of the queue or BOQ, the back of the queue of stopped vehicles, and potentially the location of unstable traffic flow. So in the little diagram on the slide, that's shown in the numbered circles as you proceed backward from the queue origin, which in the diagram is a taper or a lane drop there. So then the sensors capture vehicle speeds and or lane occupancy at defined locations upstream. Typically, the required spacing is about 1/2 to 1 mile, with potentially closer spacing near the queue generation point, if that's known. For example, in the case of a recurring bottleneck or a ramp that causes the queue at a specific location. Then data is averaged over defined time intervals, for example, 1 minute, and then compared against predefined thresholds that would warrant the posting of a warning message. An algorithm determines when to post those messages, where and on what signs to post them, and then what they should say. A couple common examples there on the slide are suggested: slow traffic X miles or slow traffic ahead, displayed when speeds begin to drop or congestion builds and the distance from the back of the queue is sufficient for that kind of cautionary message. Or as conditions worsen, we can display a stopped traffic X miles or stop traffic ahead when speeds fall below a specific threshold and the congestion that's built up is significant enough to warrant that more urgent message. Next slide. So let's look at the benefits of TMSs displaying queue warning messages now. Agencies have really found the benefits to be all around safety, of course. They identify reductions in crashes, reductions in the severity of crashes, and crash cost savings as the benefits. Agencies also often use this approach in combination with other strategies that result in aggregate benefits. So the display of queue warning messages is often one of several strategies that improve safety and mobility associated with work zones, for example. It's also one of several traffic management operational strategies, also including things like lane use control, hard shoulder running, variable speed limits. all in an effort to manage a corridor and improve safety and mobility. So as a specific example, Q warning messages are sometimes used with variable speed limits. The Q warning messages um, may complement them and help explain why speeds are being reduced, and the combination of the two result in safety and mobility benefits from smoother traffic flow and smaller speed differentials. Overall, we have to observe, though, that quantified benefits are relatively limited, but this is likely largely because the display of Q warning messages is actually a relatively inexpensive add-on among these other strategies, and perhaps there hasn't been a great effort to quantify those benefits because it is a cost-effective solution to implement. Nonetheless, so next slide, we do have a few examples of some quantified benefits. I won't spend a lot of time on this table because we'll actually hear a little bit later from Minnesota DOT and Pennsylvania DOT, and they can provide better detail about their efforts. But on the slide, we've got some examples of fairly significant reductions in crashes and injuries due to the application of TMS displaying Q warning messages. That third example there from Texas was a long-range widening project along I-35, and they measured a significant reduction in crashes with and without the use of Q warning messages during that effort, and even quantified the cost savings, crash cost savings over the construction duration. So pretty significant results there. Next slide. So I'll shift a little bit and talk about each of these key considerations next. So looking a little further into the integration with traffic management systems and sources of data, what are some implications for TMC staff? Talk about the selection of Q warning messages a little, prioritizing the posting of Q warning messages on signs, and integration with other operational strategies and other messages to manage traffic. Next slide. So when integrating Q warning messages with TMSs, there's several important considerations to work through. First, an agency should determine the extent of the display of Q warning messages, the extent that the display of the messages use elements of an existing TMS. So to do that, an agency should consider what coverage and TMS assets are needed to monitor traffic conditions. Additional traffic sensors beyond what's existing may be needed to ensure adequate granularity of the data and to determine Q characteristics. For example, lane by lane data may be important when speed characteristics vary across the roadway, which is a common characteristic at high volume interchanges or freeway exit ramps, for example. Part of determining what assets are needed to monitor traffic conditions is identifying the type and source of data. So we talked about those sources a little earlier: roadside sensors, probe or third-party data, CV data. And a common decision might be determining whether the TMS needs to augment physical sensor data with third-party traffic data, or even to operate just using third-party data. That's an option as well. And of course, assets to display the messages are also necessary, so agencies should determine whether permanent or portable CMSs are available and where they might need additional ones located to display the messages at the appropriate locations. And then so with the physical elements and data sources addressed, an agency would then need to determine the analytic requirements to display Q warning messages. This includes algorithms to analyze traffic conditions, detect the queue, select the appropriate message, and potentially requiring new software to manage that process. Then they think about business rules that should sit behind all that as well. They should be established to address issues of use criteria. For example, will the display of queue warning messages occur 24/7, or perhaps only during congested conditions, if known, or even tied to seasonal variation in roadway use? And then look at business rules as well tied to the role of the TMC operators themselves in terms of functions like supervision and message display override when that might be necessary. So next slide. Speaking of TMC operators, what are the implications for those kinds of staff? Good news there, I guess. TMS's displaying queue warning messages does not significantly affect TMC staffing levels or duties beyond baseline operations, because queue warning messages typically function with a high degree of automation. A TMC operator typically performs a supervisory role as a part of their regular duties to monitor the roadway system for incidents, for congestion, other events. The operator may confirm queue conditions to ensure a trigger is not a false positive, and to confirm posting of the queue message or override the message if a more urgent or alternative event needs to be communicated. So there is that role. In general, increased TMC operator staffing levels are unlikely to be needed, given the modest increment beyond regular duties that queue warning presents. And then should consider, though, when the display of queue warning messages is used in conjunction with other traffic management strategies, there may be the need for additional TMC staff, but this really reflects the integrated nature of managing a corridor using multiple strategies, again, such as lane use control, part-time shoulder use, variable speed limits, along with the queue warning. So there could be some staff implications when you move to that level of broader active management strategy application. Looking beyond TMC operators themselves, though, we have found if an agency is regularly deploying queue warning messages in work zones, staff dedicated to work zone planning and maybe contractor support might be needed to integrate the equipment into an agency's TMS and TMC. So there is that consideration in the scenario of significant work zone application. Next slide. For selecting particular messages, queue warning message display triggers and logic are based on defined speed thresholds. So typically free flow conditions, low traffic conditions, and stopped traffic conditions. So generally all TMSs follow some variation of comparing freeway free flow speeds, so that's V, to two speed thresholds. V1 for slow traffic, shown there on the slide, and V2 for stopped traffic. Agencies typically set V1 to be about 40 or 45 miles an hour, and then V2 to be between 20 and 35 miles per hour. So we've got a couple of examples in the table on the slide. So in the case of free flow conditions, when V is greater than that first threshold of V1, everything's moving along pretty nicely. Before a queue forms, assuming that's going to happen, the default message on the CMS could be, whatever you want to display for free flow conditions, including nothing. So that's an option. After a queue in some conditions, so post-queue, you may use the CMS for a short duration to display a post-queue message, something like traffic delays possible for up to 5 minutes or X minutes. So that's sort of the use case in the free flow condition. As a queue starts to form and we've got slow traffic conditions, our speed V falls between the upper and lower threshold. The logic would suggest to display a slow traffic message, again, something like slow traffic X miles or slow traffic ahead. If you've got multiple CMSs upstream of the queue, something close to the queue origin might display a message like congestion X miles, whereas further away, it's more cautionary, caution, reduced speed for drivers anticipating the formation of a queue downstream. On the stop traffic message side, when the speed drops below that lower threshold, typical message display there would be stop traffic X miles or stop traffic ahead. And again, maybe some distinction depending on how close you are to the origin in terms of what's displayed on the CMS. Something close to the origin would say stop traffic ahead, whereas further away would be slightly less urgent, be prepared to stop. Those are common messages in those basic scenarios. A little bit about message prioritization. Generally, a queue warning message should be displayed unless there is a higher priority, such as for an incident or crash. So not too much probably is considered to be higher priority. Queue warning message would be pretty well up there. As a comparison, a queue warning message priority could be on par with something like an adverse weather notification. Just as a specific example, on its US 23 Flex route, which has multiple active traffic management strategies, Michigan DOT gives queue warning messages the highest priority among messages that it posts on small CMSs mounted on periodic overhead gantries. So they view it as a significant priority. Next slide. Touched on this a bit already, but just to reiterate, queue warning messages are often incorporated into TMSs that more broadly or holistically manage recurring and non-recurring congestion dynamically based on prevailing and predicted traffic conditions. So integrated strategies can include dynamic lane use control, part-time shoulder use, variable speed limits, ramp metering. These individual strategies generally share the same TMS elements, which include vehicle traffic detection equipment, changeable message signs, and communication equipment. Queue warning messages are integrated with these strategies through an agency's TMS operating system and share similar functions, including collecting and using same or similar data, relying on algorithms to perform their functions, requiring similar activities of operators, and displaying messages as part of their function. So again, a queue warning message or the display of queue warning messages can often be one part of the broader corridor management strategy that a TMS is already equipped to function. Next slide. Wrap up here with some lessons learned from all of this. So recent survey of practice that informed or supported this TMC pooled fund study project and this close examination of queue warning messages revealed that many state DOTs have successfully deployed the use of queue warning messages along freeway corridors and in work zones. So kind of a baseline obvious finding there. For those in work zones, some may function independently of an agency's TMC and do not integrate with the TMS. So in some cases, these systems may connect to existing changeable message signs, but are automated through local control. But there are also good examples of agencies that use components of an existing TMS and integrate with the TMC for those work zone applications. Typically, these uses of queue warning messages are enabled by additional software incorporated into the TMS. Displaying queue warning messages does not add significant costs to managing and operating TMSs, which use existing assets to display the queue warning messages on permanent and portable CMS. New equipment may be necessary when sensor coverage is insufficient for the message displayed decision-making algorithm, or if additional CMS are needed at critical locations upstream of the queue to warn drivers at appropriate junctures. Most common sources of data to detect unstable traffic flow or queues are sensors, roadside sensors, third-party sources, or crowdsourced data, for example, from mobile device applications. The display of queue warning messages typically does not increase the number of operators managing and operating a TMS. Displaying queue warning messages is highly automated, where operators generally performing a supervisory role as part of their regular duties to monitor the roadway system. The level of operator focus may increase with the volume of queue warning deployments, especially if they are regularly used for work zones. Generally, though, the demands on a TMC operator's time do not warrant an increase in staffing. In the case of select work zones, an agency may need staff or contractor support to integrate field devices deployed to monitor traffic conditions and display messages into an agency's TMS to monitor traffic conditions. And then last, the display of queue warning messages enhances the effectiveness of other operational strategies by providing a rationale related to downstream traffic conditions. So when downstream traffic conditions are slowed or stopped, it can lend credence to the application of a variable speed limit and why that's being implemented. So that's wraps up our lessons learned and challenges and overview section. I'll hand it back to Alex.
Thank you so much, Reno, for being here today and giving a nice overview of the topic to start us off. Our next speaker, Garrett Schreiner, is Freeway Operations Engineer at Minnesota DOT, and he will be providing an overview of his agency's use of queue warning messages. Hand it over to you, Garrett.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex said, I'm Garrett Schreiner, Freeway Operations Engineer at MnDOT. And we've been working with queue warning systems for some time and happy to provide some of our experiences and lessons learned. Next slide. So MnDOT has used 3, I'll say, dedicated or permanent locations. In the past, we currently, only one of those 3 is still in use. We started our first kind of step into it wasn't a dedicated queue warning system, but it was integrated into our intelligent lane control system that we had on 35W and 94 in the Twin Cities metro area, where we had lane control signals every half mile through for a significant stretch of both of those corridors. We put in variable speed limits, but they weren't actual speed limits based on Minnesota statute. They were advisory only speeds, and we kind of used that to help warn people of slowdowns ahead. There was some latency in the system. Our ATMS did some additional smoothing of the speed data that made it not as effective. The system currently is not in place, not because of that aspect of it, but more the hardware issue. We had significant maintenance costs with those devices. We opted to take those down and replace them with CMS every mile or so. The second one was, it was mentioned in an earlier slide, our university, the University of Minnesota, did a research project with us to set up a queue warning system in Minneapolis on 94, where we were looking at downstream conditions and warning traffic on a single DMS upstream. And it showed significant improvements and reduction in crashes, but there was kind of a footnote on that slide that it was looking at a very specific type of crash in one specific location. So the numbers may be somewhat inflated based on that. And also it was in the middle of a major reconstruction of an interchange in Minneapolis that reconfigured the layout of where the ramps were coming in and where the exits were. So that alone had some impacts on, could also have impacted the results there. That system, it was effective, but the algorithm used was a little complicated and and we were looking at other options. Instead of incorporating that algorithm into our ATMS, we were looking at maybe some simpler but just as effective options. Um, and that's kind of what we landed with. The third system, which is currently still in place, is we have a bridge that heads into St. Paul on US 52 that has a kind of a significant vertical curve, and it ends in a interchange with 94. In that location, the center lane always backs up, and we have significant speed differentials between the center lane and the left and right lanes. And the lane assignments at the interchange are a little unintuitive. You have to be in the left lane if you want to go to the right, which would be eastbound 94. So we get a stopped center lane, and then people in the free flow left lane that are stopping and trying to get into that center lane once they realize they selected the wrong lane. So we incorporated a queue warning system into our DMS that's upstream. And in addition to a stop traffic ahead or a slow traffic ahead message, we also put what's shown on the screen here. We emulate a static sign with the lane assignments to give people a little extra, when there's stop traffic in that center lane, give people a little extra warning so they can pick the correct lane before they get to the interchange. That has seemed to be very effective. I don't have specific crash numbers on any reductions, but subjectively it has been very effective, and we can watch from the operation center that being deployed as traffic slows down in that center lane. Next slide. So our current practice in Minnesota is we really are using the queue warning systems as part of our work zone management, congestion management for work zones in our intelligent work zones or connected work zones. Our typical setup is we'll have 3 PCMS or 4, depending on the location and the geometry, that are spaced about a mile apart, trying to incorporate upstream of the expected end of queue. And then we will have temporary detection at half-mile spacing if we aren't able to utilize our existing mainline detection. And the way we have it set up in our system, we basically have 4 different messages that are always active, but with varying levels of priority. The highest priority would be the stop traffic ahead. And so if we're detecting traffic speeds 30 miles an hour or less within 2 miles, we'll display the stop traffic ahead, be prepared to stop message on the PCMS. The next lower priority would be slow traffic ahead. So if there's no stop traffic ahead trigger, then it'll revert to the slow traffic ahead, use caution. If it's detecting 45-mile-an-hour speeds within 3 miles. And if it is not detecting that, it'll be blank, or we'll have a travel time or a delay time posted on the PCMS. We also will blank the sign if traffic is detected to be stopped at the PCMS. We don't need to tell them that there's stop traffic ahead if they're already stopped in traffic. So we'll either just blank the sign or change it to a delay message so people can expect how long they're going to be stuck in that queue. Next slide. We also incorporate an active zipper merge into our system in certain locations at the request of a project engineer or a project manager for a specific work zone. And the way that is set up is that we look at the through lane, the lane that is not ending. And if occupancy of that lane is greater than or equal to 25% based on our traffic detection, we will turn on the merge ahead, use both lanes message on the PCMS. One thing that we do when we set up these systems is we will monitor them periodically to make sure that they're working as intended. And if they're not, we can tweak those speed thresholds. There are variables within our ATMS that we can set. And so we can get that working properly in the correct location and turning on when they're needed, but not activating when they're not needed. We can verify them on camera if we have a camera view, or have someone in the field verify that they are working properly. Otherwise, they do run autonomously, and we kind of set it and forget it unless we hear after we've tweaked everything and made sure it's working properly. And unless we get a complaint from someone in the field or one of our operators notices anything, they just kind of run on their own. And in our ATMS, we can see what's being displayed on those PCMSs or our permanent DMS, but they are shown as a automated message, so they don't clutter up our operators' screens with all of their user deployed messages for incidents. Next slide. So some lessons learned after operating these systems. We have looked at using probe data for our detection method, and probe data is great. And if we have an existing queue that's kind of static, I would say, probe data is great. One area where we found an issue is when a queue is first forming, or if a shockwave is traveling upstream, the timeliness of the probe data, at least the probe data that we have integrated into our system, it's not quite timely enough for a queue warning message. So we typically will use the probe data if we're going to post a delay message or a travel time, but to actually activate the stopped or slow traffic ahead message, we use either our permanent or temporary detection. One thing with that's, I don't know if this is unique to Minnesota, but the way our system is set up, we have our traffic detection is set up where it will automatically fail a detector if we get a high occupancy spike, and then which would normally indicate that there's a problem with the detector, and then our system will stop using that detector in its calculations and algorithms until the occupancy values have come back to what it expects as a reasonable level. This works great, except for places where there actually is stop traffic, either due to an incident or a work zone. It'll make our detectors auto fail when they really shouldn't. So we had to modify our ATMS to allow us to kind of ignore the auto fail condition, specifically in queue warning, in the queue warning messaging. That was something that we found out after the fact as we were working with these systems and noticing that we were having some issues with the detection failing, or the ATMS thinking the detection was failed. Another thing when we are planning for these queue warning systems approaching our work zones, it is important to have somewhat of an idea of where the end of queue is going to be, just for determining where to place the PCMS and the temporary detection. But if we get it wrong, we're mostly using trailer mounted systems, so it's not a huge deal to go out and adjust the layout, but it definitely helps with setup if we have a good understanding of where we expect those queues to be. Next slide. Another lesson learned, our system is set up to be able to display the location of the stop traffic. It'll look 2 or 3 miles downstream, and when it returns the information back to the system, it will give us the location, whether it's a mile ahead, half a mile ahead, 2 miles ahead. And we used to put those on the messages, stop traffic 1 mile ahead. But we've moved away from that to try and simplify how we have it set up in our system. And we no longer display the actual location of the queue. We just say stop traffic ahead, be prepared to stop, or something a little bit more generic. We want the drivers to be paying attention. And it also helps if there's a fast moving end of queue or shockwave, that it eliminates any worry about latency in the system. You know, if we say it's a half mile ahead, but they encounter it, you know, sooner than that, we don't want to. We want people to just be aware that it is ahead, not necessarily saying the exact location. Another lesson learned, this is more on the contracting side of the system. We used to incorporate the intelligent work zones project by project, including it in each construction project, but that was a challenge trying to integrate the systems with several different vendors, traffic control subcontractors. So we decided several years ago to pull that out and run it as kind of one master contract from our traffic management center. That way we're dealing with one vendor. We've integrated the system already. It's very easy to set up and move. We have pay items for relocating systems. And then it also, that is their only focus for that contract. We don't need to worry about making sure that it's, you know, a priority for the prime contractor. It has just made things work a lot more smoothly. The only issue is we need to make sure we don't interfere with the work of the prime contractor on those construction projects. It also gives us really good responsiveness if there's technical or hardware issues that we've found. Next slide. All right, so this just kind of in general, the map here just shows all of the detector stations that we have in the Twin Cities metro area. We have very good coverage, which allows us to set these systems up on the fly wherever they're needed. It gives us a lot of flexibility. The only issue is putting in temporary detection if where it is needed is due to a construction project that's impacting our traffic detection, which usually our Q warning systems are outside of the work zone, approaching the work zone. So we are able to utilize our permanent detection quite a bit. But with our extensive network of traffic detection is pretty flexible. We can put these systems pretty much wherever we need to. And then having it part of our ATMS and incorporating the PCMS into our ATMS, we're able to use our permanent detection, our permanent message boards as well to supplement the PCMS, especially in areas where maybe there's not a lot of spaces on the shoulder to put a trailer mounted message board. We can utilize our existing overhead permanent message boards. All right, and that is all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Garrett, for that overview of your system and some of the lessons learned in Minnesota. Our third presenter today is Dominic Delcole. Dominic is a TMC supervisor at Ohio DOT, and he will be talking about Ohio DOT's history of using Q warning messages and how they have evolved over time. Dominic, thank you for presenting.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate you guys having me. Like Alex said, my name is Dominic Delcole. I'm a supervisor in the Traffic Management Center. Start off with a brief overview of where we started and where we ended up, and just a little different than the other presenters. This whole presentation is basically a lesson learned. So to start off, our first site became operational in about 2010 in Columbus, Ohio, on I-70 eastbound, about a mile outside of downtown Columbus. It's actually the upper right image in the image that you see right there. By 2015, we had expanded to 5 sites statewide, and by statewide, I mean Cincinnati and Columbus. And these sites were radar and radio activated. And for anybody that's familiar with these types of systems, they're very unreliable. And these are pre-probe data days for the older people in the audience. Basically, there were Doppler radars like on a pole set, downstream about a mile or so, Rain would set them off. They were highly unreliable. They were off more than they were on. Just they're bad systems. So basically, what ended up happening is the TMC ended up posting time of day messages, morning rush, evening rush, which were only slightly more reliable, but they required constant babysitting. Like for instance, like if it was a holiday and there wasn't any, traffic, we would have to take them down, or maybe rush hour started a little late, or etc. Right. So this process lasted about 10 years. The signs were basically an afterthought. They were often taken offline for long periods of time, even during construction, which would probably be the most helpful time to have these signs activated, to alert, alert vehicles ahead of queues. Next slide, please. This is just an image of one of our sites in Cincinnati. As you can see, it looks like it's in the middle of a snowstorm, and this is actually when it was active in the middle of construction. This is one of our 2 locations in Cincinnati. Next slide, please. So this takes us up to almost present day. So on November 14th in 2023, there was a fatal bus crash just outside of Columbus, Ohio on westbound I-70. Traffic was queued up due to an incident on the right shoulder about a mile ahead of the crash. The bus was carrying a high school band from Eastern Ohio to Columbus, Ohio to perform a concert. A semi-truck traveling at an excessive speed collided with an SUV. Inside the SUV were a teacher and 2 chaperones. The SUV then collided with the bus with such force it took hours before first responders even realized there was a vehicle between the semi-truck and a charter bus. ODOT knew for years that end of queue crashes were a major problem and only getting worse, mostly due to distracted driving. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a tragic event to cause change. So, important note, during this time frame, ODOT was in the midst of a massive expansion of our wrong-way detection system, which is also a major issue, obviously. So systems were in Cincinnati. We had locations added. There was locations were added in Cincinnati. The Dayton system was just coming online. Cleveland was just being installed. So our ITS section basically had to make a hard pivot and use some of the same technologies being used in the wrong way systems to install a whole new from scratch queue warning system on the fly. We actually had to borrow a queue warning sign from another location to speed up the process. Otherwise, we would have had to wait several months once you add in the time for ordering the sign, getting the sign commissioned, etc. With the help of our ATMS provider, they stopped all of our enhancements that we had off working on to focus on the queue warning site at State Route 310 where this bus crash was. Next slide, please. So this is Governor DeWine. This is actually at the site of that bus crash. So this is actually the day before we unrolled the new location at State Route 310. So you're actually looking westbound towards Columbus. So as you can see, traffic is actually queued up pretty far. And this location is about 10 or 15 miles outside the city of Columbus, heading into the city. As you can see, he's actually pointing at the queue and people diving off into the left shoulder. It's estimated that there were a total of 8,800 end of queue highway crashes in Ohio in 2023. So this is the exact location of that bus crash a few months earlier. So it is a normal occurrence during morning rush hour. The site became active on February 15th, about 3 months to the day of the fatal crash. In ITS project terms, I mean, it's almost moving at light speed. So from the bus crash to the installation of the new site was about 3 months, which is unbelievable in our terms. Next slide, please. So this is that. Oh, could you go back a slide? I think we skipped one, maybe. There we go. Okay. Yep, there we go. So this is actually that new site out at State Route 310. It actually uses fixed queue detection cameras. They're actually mounted on a pole. So this is actually about a half a mile behind where the fatal bus crash was. It's about so that overpass, I don't know if you can kind of see it in the background. So that's actually State Route 310, and the on ramp from 310 to westbound is a heavy merge area and causes a lot of morning congestion. So that's what actually helped cause that crash. Next slide, please. So the new system uses milestone alerts. We use stationary cameras to help detect slowdowns and actually sends alerts through Milestone. Milestone is actually the system we use to view cameras in our traffic management system, or our traffic management center, excuse me. It helps to detect slow and stop traffic. Traffic ahead messages automatically post to queue warning signs through our ATMS. I think there's a video attached. Would you mind playing it? So as you can see, as traffic goes through these areas and goes through the box, it's basically sensing how much time the vehicles are spending inside the red box, and that's what helps trigger the ATMS signs, or to trigger the queue warning signs through our ATMS. Next slide, please. So Milestone, it also sends the TMC an email to notify us of slow traffic, just in case the messages don't automatically post to our queue warning signs. The messages will drop from a sign when no queue is detected for 5 minutes from the last triggered event. The image that you're seeing, this is actually from downtown Columbus. So once no alarm is sensed for 5 minutes, the signs will automatically drop. It is a very reliable system so far. We have had a lot of success with this. Next slide, please. So this is TOAST. So this is Traffic Operation Assessment Systems tool. Basically what this is, it's a scanning tool to help identify operationally sensitive corridors that may benefit from TSMO strategies. So we scored 11,000 corridors statewide using 5 main data categories. So bottlenecks, travel time, TSMO safety, traffic incident management, and traffic volume data. And also we use bottlenecks and travel time probe-based crowdsourced data. And we use all of this data along with ODOT district input to help determine the new locations of our new queue warning systems. Next slide, please. So using all of that data, we helped determine 13 locations throughout the state to install these new systems. So these sites will be in and around major urban centers that have been identified by ODOT as high congestion, high crash areas. Once the technology is installed at all 13 sites, ODOT anticipates it will help reduce end of queue crashes by at least 16%, which equates to around 1,400 crashes. These sites are expected to be active within 2 years. That's really all I got.
Okay, thanks, Dominic, for that fascinating look into ODOT's alert and warning system. Our final speaker, David Gaffney, is the TMC Operations Manager at Pennsylvania DOT, and he will be talking about Pennsylvania DOT's use cases and implementation of queue warning messages.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everyone. Like Alex said, I'm going to discuss PennDOT's experience with queue detection, monitoring, and management. Next slide. So for us, there are a couple of different ways we had managed queues in the past, and to some extent, we still use these methods in certain areas. The first one is work zones, where we would rent a queue detection system through a construction project as part of the work zone traffic control plan. The concern with those is they're often very expensive. And if they're not programmed into the funding for the project, it can be difficult to add these systems to projects later. This has sometimes led to decisions not to use the systems. And for the safety benefits of the systems, we really wanted a solution that would allow us to better manage those queues in work zones. The other method is using manual detection. So an operator, when they see a queue and then they react to that queue, often with those operators, they're working on multiple incidents or roadways all at once, and it can be difficult for them to keep up with the changing queue. They also may simply create a message that addresses the cause of the queue, but not where the queue is or where that concern is for those drivers. So with that in mind, we started working on a solution that could be deployed quickly to corridors where existing probe data or detectors could provide a level of queue detection, and then from there, monitor and message those queues in ways that operators can't, at a much lower cost than some of the traditional queue detection systems. Next slide. As we move towards an automated system, we had to think about the use cases and locations where this made sense. There are three main use cases where we deploy queue protection corridors, in work zones, some integrated corridors, and then general automated messaging corridors. The map to the right shows the areas where we have deployed those automated messaging corridors. And some of those corridors started as work zones and have remained active after the work is done. And some have been created to address queuing or challenging weather conditions. Next slide. So this is an overview of where we have our message priorities. In the past few years, to accommodate the addition of these messages, we've updated this list. Currently, the message priority for automated ITS messages is a priority level 5, as you can see in that list. But we often adjust that priority depending on the type of message and the corridor that we are working with. We have moved some of these priorities around, and depending on the corridor, we have deviated from this list for other messages as well. Next slide. So the first sort of major corridor that I want to talk about is the Schuylkill Expressway corridor, Interstate 76 near Philadelphia. The corridor is one of the highest traffic routes in Pennsylvania with heavy congestion and traffic nearly every day, weekends included. The expressway has limited room to expand from 2 lanes. Because of the challenging terrain in that area. There's a river on one side and a steep embankment on the other. In the last few years, there have been multiple TSMO projects to help improve safety and mobility along this corridor. The first part of that effort included deploying variable speed limit signs and queue detection. For this corridor, the VSLs and queue messaging are coordinated to give drivers the best possible information of where they will encounter the queuing and when they could see slowing traffic. Next slide. So for the Schuylkill Expressway, the messaging and speeds are detector driven. So in addition to deploying VSL signs and CMS, the project deployed detectors. There were also existing detectors on the corridor that were integrated into the system. This provides closer to real-time speeds and messages. There are 2 messages that we use to provide queue information, one for slow traffic, where speeds drop below 40 miles an hour, and one for stop traffic, when speeds drop below 20 miles an hour. Due to the density of devices and traffic patterns on the corridor, the messages are posted only between 1 mile and 3 miles upstream of the queue. These messages complement the VSLs, and when speeds begin to drop, the VSL signs will step down the speeds in advance of the queue to further warn and slow traffic. Next slide. So for this corridor, the messaging and speeds are detector driven. So in addition to, for any projects like this, it is important to evaluate the impact the changes have had to both mobility and safety. In this case, the corridor was analyzed for 2022 and 2023 after the system was implemented, and compared to pre-pandemic traffic data. We've seen a reduction in crashes, a reduction in rear end crashes, fewer crashes with injuries and serious injuries, and a reduction in travel times throughout the corridor. We have encountered some challenges with the system as it ages, and we learn more about the capabilities of devices. One of the major lessons learned from this project in particular is that when we integrated the existing detectors, their calibration and maintenance have been very challenging. So moving forward, we want to consider that we add detectors to the project to replace existing detectors so we don't run into those challenges in the future. Next slide. So I-78, this is the next corridor that we want to talk about. One of our triggers for deploying automated queue detection was a work zone on Interstate 78 between Harrisburg and Allentown. The construction was a multi-year effort to reconstruct the highway. You can see a picture there of the conditions from the work zone. The traffic control plan didn't reduce the number of lanes for traffic, but it did confine traffic with barrier on either side with little to no shoulder. This area, again, has high traffic, and during the early stages of construction saw significant queuing and crashes. To help alleviate some of those safety concerns and improve mobility on the corridor, we had worked on improving the work zone elements to better direct drivers through the work zone, as well as deploying automated queue protection. In contrast to the 76 corridor, messaging was activated further back of the queue, and the messages varied in priority based on distance from that queue. Again, like I said, the priorities can be adjusted for any of the corridors we have deployed to provide flexibility for our local TMCs to adjust those messages. Next slide. This is an example of the messages that are posted using a couple of different sizes of CMS and the different distances on I-78. Similar to 76, the speed thresholds are set to display stopped or slow traffic. In this case, the slow traffic threshold was set at 45 miles an hour and the stop traffic threshold was set at 30 miles an hour. Again, these speeds can be configured by the corridor, so depending on the prevailing conditions, we can adjust those as needed. Next slide. Again, one more slide. So like I-76, we analyzed the effectiveness of the queue detection and queue management. We have seen a reduction in, again, the total crashes, rear end crashes, fatal crashes, and injury crashes. And this is on an annualized basis. You can see those results there in the graph. Next slide. So kind of moving towards the future, some of the ongoing efforts that we have for work zones. We are purchasing modems through stick funds. This will allow quick deployment to portable message boards that we can then connect into ATMS. We're going to continue looking to develop or deploy similar solutions in the coming years. And then the other piece of that is we've deployed a lot of VSLs over the last couple of years in rural areas specific to weather, but we're also looking to integrate those into our ATMS and then use those to support work zones as well as queue detection in other areas. So like I said, we have those modems. We're going to be connecting them to those corridors and trying to improve our queue protection functions through work zones. Next slide. So in addition to those, we have automated other messages as well, specifically around hazardous weather conditions. So like those queue protection messages. It can be difficult for operators to keep up with the snow squalls and other conditions that roll through certain corridors. So these systems and these areas use road weather information systems data to determine when specific conditions exist and post the messages accordingly. The distances are configurable, so if it's further away from an RWIS station and we think that there's maybe a condition or a change in the conditions that we're going to see there, we'll adjust that distance to be as appropriate. Most of the interstate network is within a 15-mile radius of an RWIS station. And we have deployed RWIS stations at key locations to help support these. You can see there the likelihood of a crash increasing, or the increase in the likelihood of a crash based on certain weather conditions. And those conditions have informed the messaging around automated weather messaging. Next slide. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is really a lesson learned, these are high profile devices that we see them at the TMC level, but the public sees them, our executive staff sees them, we've seen the value of them. So we have to be on top of maintaining these devices. For these corridors, especially where we've deployed VSLs in conjunction with that, we make this the highest priority of maintenance. We're getting parts and pieces out there as quickly as we can to get these devices back up and running when they do fail. The other piece with the VSLs is they've replaced permanent static speed limit signs and then function as that speed limit sign in those areas. So there are a lot of safety implications of those devices that we have to make sure we address. And I don't think we fully realized the impact these would have, and had gotten to the point where we were prioritizing them as quickly as we should have been early on. So that's one of the major lessons learned that we have from this. Next slide. So where are we going in the future? We're planning to deploy queue protection weather warning corridors statewide. In the Pittsburgh area, design is underway for another corridor similar to what we have on the Schuylkill Expressway. The route faces similar constraints as the Schuylkill Expressway, where there's not a lot of room to expand, but there is high traffic. So other areas are also deploying additional VSLs and CMS to take advantage of the queue protection, and some areas also taking advantage of automated weather messaging. We're constantly looking for more opportunities to improve the capabilities of the devices and systems we deploy, and to help our operators effectively manage traffic. Next slide. There's my contact information if you have any questions about how we've deployed queue protection in Pennsylvania. And Alex, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that presentation. As David said, we are going to move into the Q&A portion, and I'll reserve just a couple minutes at the very end on how to stay connected. We did have 3 questions that were asked during the presentation, and I see another one just popped into the chat box. So Reno, I saw you already responded to a couple of these, but our first question was, why not indicate which lane is blocked ahead? Or does that create a faster queue growth in the closed lane and more drivers speeding down the adjacent lane, knowing that others will need to merge ahead? Any feedback on that condition? Reno, if you want to jump on and give a quick explanation of what you said there, or if any of the other presenters today would like to discuss it.
Yeah, I'd appreciate input from the real practitioners if they've got other thoughts. I noted in the written a response that I think that scenario might apply to an active traffic management corridor where you've got the capability um, to apply lane use controls and maybe direct traffic from one lane to another, or indicate what lane may be closed or blocked. I think in a number of the applications we looked at, that I presented on, the display of queue warning messages was used as a standalone application, and that kind of scenario was maybe not applicable. And often I think the queue warning, the queue itself affects all lanes upstream. So there wouldn't really be the need to indicate a specific lane condition or direct traffic from one to another. But obviously these scenarios can vary considerably. I'd turn it to the others who may have additional thoughts.
So from our perspective at PennDOT, we set the queue detection or the queue messaging as a higher priority than most of our other incidents. And one of the thought processes there is the ATMS system will queue those messages. It'll keep those messages set up and ready to go. So if that queue message comes off of the message board, the message that tells you which lane is blocked will come up. This ties back into a little bit of Suzette's question, where when you have those stopped and slow messages, but the traffic's already, at a stop or going very slowly, do those messages, come off? And those messages will come off for us once you get downstream, or the queue has passed that CMS. So once we hit that CMS, that can go back to directing you which lane you need to go to, and then usually that will give us enough space to make those decisions. So that's been sort of the way PennDOT's managed that.
I'll add also in Missouri that some of the locations where we use the queue warnings, we're using probe data, so we do not have information on which lane is causing the slowdown unless we have a camera in that area and can see it. David, since you were just talking, let's skip ahead to one that was entered in the chat. Is there a backup plan to communicate speed limits in areas where the VSL only have electronic signs? What do you do if the signs lose power?
So there's a couple of pieces there. Some of our VSLs are portables that run on battery power. So those signs, we're actually monitoring the battery voltage, keeping an eye on that. And then as we see those voltages drop, we're actually sending someone out to address that, either through swapping batteries or charging those batteries. With the VSLs, for communications, there isn't necessarily a backup plan. Like I said, we're prioritizing that, and that sort of creates an emergency. It isn't always the end of the world when one of these goes down, but we do try to address it as quickly as we can. Unfortunately, the areas where some of these are in, there aren't a lot of options for other communications or power. And what we've found is sometimes the solar power and the battery power can be a little bit undersized. So we've been looking at how we increase the size of the power source coming to it. So those are a couple of the things. I think we're still learning how those are impacted and what we can do to make sure they have really good uptime. But that is definitely a concern.
Thanks, David. Although it does sound like it's a concern, it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into mitigating that concern as much as possible. We also had one that was more of a comment than a question. Russell Holt said that it can be hard for agencies to absolutely or empirically understand and verify the extent of how many motorists actually change their behavior based on the messages, and if the Q warning system directly caused the crash reduction. But regardless, before and after safety and speed or other CV database like hard braking studies are the best we can do, and surely the Q warning messages do help. Yes, I agree with that somewhat, that it can be hard to quantify something that doesn't happen rather than something that does. It's very easy to measure things like travel times, but maybe not as much number of crashes reduced. Being able to directly link it to the Q warning system rather than any other kind of volume, speed, weather, whatever that changes from year to year. Does the panel have anything they'd like to add on this subject? Okay, I guess I did a great job of answering it then. I'm going to ask one more question here and then move on to the final portion. Just a general question for the group. Have the capability and functions performed as you anticipated? And how much has that changed from the beginning to current?
I think I'd say it's functioned as we, sort of expected. But we have found that it doesn't always fit the conditions that are out there, and we have to be flexible to adjust to those conditions, and understanding the limitations of the systems. But overall, I think they work really well and are a huge benefit to how we manage traffic overall, and really help support the operators as they work through incidents.
And yeah, I would add to that. In Minnesota, I feel like they've worked very well in how we've expected. With small tweaks and lessons learned as we go. One of the things, having the ability to adjust our speed thresholds has been important because location specific. Sometimes it's a little bit different if we're getting speed data that's averaged across all lanes. But the problem is in a specific lane, then sometimes we need to tweak the thresholds to account for that. The average speed might be like inflated if there's a free flow lane and a stop lane, but overall, I would agree. At least in Minnesota, it's worked well as expected.
There we go. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I think it's a little too early to tell on our end since we're still rolling out these sites. The only thing I can really comment on is the one site that is active, the one that was installed at State Route 310. We haven't had any major accidents at that location. The older locations, I think they've been out there so long. I think people are just kind of numb to them at this point because over the years they've displayed such inaccurate information. I think my hope is with the new locations that becomes less obvious, I guess. That's my hope. I mean, I think the sample size is too small to tell at this point on the ODOT side.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let's move into the closing of the session here. There will be a poll question at the end, so if you could stick around, if you don't have anything left, would appreciate it. First up, we have our recently completed TMC Pool Fund Study work products. Reminder that you can go to the TMC PFS website under FHWA's umbrella and view all the completed projects on the completed projects page. Go to the next slide, please. Again, the upcoming webinars in the series, we have every other month, April, June, August, October, and December. And we'll continue on to next year as well, though we do not have all of those topics lined up or the dates we're going to present on them yet. If you are interested in being a speaker on one of the upcoming webinars, please let John Openberger at FHWA know. Next slide. Finally, just to revisit the NoCo portal with the TMS portal, how to submit resources. On that left side, you can submit examples or practices. So any kind of studies you've done, any fact sheets, anything like that, feel free to submit them there. And then also, even if you are not a member of the TMC Pool Fund Study, we're always looking for ideas for new research to do. You can go ahead and use that submit a new research idea. And whether it's used by the Pool Fund Study or NCHRP or whatever, we're always happy to get more information there. We do have a request as well from Val Rader. Does anyone have an SEA they can share on that site? So if you have that ability, this would be a great chance to go in and try to make use of that portal. Matt, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Alex. I just have the closing poll on the screen. If everyone could just take a chance to answer that, just because we're starting to get short on time. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I also want to thank our panelists, Reno, Garrett, Dominic, and David, and of course, our moderator, Alex. We had a great discussion here today. As I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on the NOCA website. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.